All right, seems like the clock is like 4:45. It's time to get started. Welcome to this service manager session. I'm glad to see so many of you here. I hope you enjoyed your first day of TechEd. I sure did. My name is Anders Asp. I work as a principal consultant at a company called Lumagate. Lumagate is based in Sweden, and that's why I have such a silly accent. I'm also an MVP in the System Center Cloud and Data Center Management area. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I co-authored the Service Manager Cookbook. I'm a trainer. I train service manager courses in Sweden and Norway. I got my own blog at scsm.se. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. I've been working with Service Manager for 5 years now, 2 years at a municipal and 3 years as a consultant, and I've seen many different kind of scenarios and many different customers. And today we will be looking at some of my lessons learned during these 5 years. So the agenda now is my do's and don'ts of implementing Service Manager. Now, I know the title here is Advanced Lessons Learned, but I will be talking about different scenarios of different kind of complexity, from basic to advanced. So I'm hoping that you have the right expectations going into this session. All right? So I would like to start with the core of Service Manager, and that would be the processes. And Nathan just had a whole session about the processes here, and I hope you saw that session. But Service Manager is a tool to support your processes. Service Manager doesn't make a bad process any better. People tend to forget about the processes when working with Service Manager. But Service Manager is built around this. And that's where we have to start when doing implementation of Service Manager. Do an envision, an assessment. Look at the processes in use. How are these working? Who's the owner of these processes? What's the KPIs? Who's the incident manager? Who's the change manager? And so on. And you need to start there. This is a key success factor to a successful Service Manager project. Start with your processes. Another key part for a successful Service Manager project is the people. When doing a project like this, you have to involve the right people. The Service Manager is a tool designed for your IT department. It's a service desk application. So you need to involve the right people within IT, from each support group, from users from each process. But you have to remember the end users, because Service Manager will serve as a front end for IT. People will contact IT through the self-service portal in Service Manager. So you have to involve these people as well, and make sure that all of these people can express their opinion on what they think is important in this project. Make sure that you keep them informed so they know what is happening and why you're doing this journey of implementing Service Manager. So this is really the core part of Service Manager, the processes and the people. The technology is simple. It might maybe also be the most fun part, but this is the most important part. Now, when talking about the processes, let's start to take a look at the categories and area lists used in the console of Service Manager. Now, category and areas might seem like an easy topic, but trust me, I get loads of discussions on this topic when I go to customers. Now, category or area is used in all the processes. You have them in incident management, service request, problem, and so on. And they're called different things, but they're essentially used in the same way. These look kind of different out of the box. You can see that the service request area is really different from the incident classification categories. And this is somewhat confusing to your analysts. So I would like to share my thoughts on this. But first, let's take a look at some statistics. So this is some statistics from a customer of mine, which I helped about a year ago. They used another service desk application. And in this tool, they were working with incident management. This tool also has some kind of categorization. And they wanted to take the same list and move it into Service Manager. And I had to take this discussion with them. So to start with, this customer had 284 categories in this previous tool. So this list was huge. And it was also a flat list, so it was really a huge list. Out of these 284 categories, 88 of these were used less than 10 times a year. And that's not even once per month. The top 9 items here, and that's the one that you can see on your right-hand side, were represented in 75% of all their incidents. So even though they had this huge list, they only used like 9 items, which is rather confusing. If we take a look at the actual top 9 categories, you can see that the top category was login issues. There's nothing strange with that. That's probably the most common one. The second largest one was Outlook. And in Service Manager, Outlook should have been an affected CI. It shouldn't be a category. But the third one is the category called Other. And that's kind of strange, isn't it? So they had this huge list, 284 items, and the 11% of all instances will still use the category called Other. So why is that? Well, I think it might be so that they had too many choices. The lists were too huge. They couldn't find the most appropriate fit, so they took the easy path and selected Other instead. Or they found several fits and couldn't decide on which one was the most appropriate one, so they select Other. So this is the don't. Don't do it this way. You don't take your previous list and import it into Service Manager. You have to keep your list down. So this is my take on the list. So when talking about category or area in Service Manager, try to keep these lists short. I would say about 10 items. And I actually managed to get this customer from 284 items to 13, so it's possible. Child items is OK, but don't overdo it. Because if you have 10 main categories and then 10 child items, then you will end up with 100 categories anyway, so keep it short. To get the whole picture of what the instance is all about, or the service request is all about, you have to combine the category or area together with the affected CI or the affected services. That's how you get the whole picture. So you do a rough categorization using the instance classification, and then you do the more specific categorization using the affected CI. Okay? And avoid using Other as a list item. By removing Other from your list, you're forcing your analyst to make an active decision on the best fit. So even though you might only have 10 categories, they have to do a selection. They can't take the easy path in selecting Other. And when working in Service Manager, we're working with all these different processes. We might start with a couple of incidents, moving into a problem request, and going from a problem into a change request. And while doing so, it's really nice to have the same kind of base list in the area of categorization. That will make your analyst recognize the list, makes life much more easier for them. All right. So the next part here is about workflows or subscriptions. And this is a really, really common error. People tend to build workflows or subscription using an untight criteria. And I see this all the time at customers, at mail lists, and at forums. So let's discuss this. So first of all, this is the don't do it this way. But this is how people usually do it. So let's say that we would like to create a notification upon resolving an incident. We want to notify our end users when we resolve an incident. The way people tend to do it is like this. They will create a new subscription. They will select the incident class. And then when they come here to that criteria part, they will go, hey, change from, I don't care. I only care about what it was changed to, because I want to trigger this when it goes to resolve. So they won't specify a criteria change from. Instead, they would specify status equals resolved in the change to part. Now, would this work? Would this trigger an email upon resolving an incident? Yes, it would. It would trigger email when we resolve an incident. But this would also trigger an email if you update a resolved incident. So for instance, if you change the description of a resolved incident, this will trigger an email. Or if you change the analyst assigned to a user on a resolved incident, this will also trigger an email. So if you configure your workflows or subscription using this kind of criteria, you will be sending out unexpected emails, unwanted emails. The thing here is that the wording of the change from and change to is wrong. Service Manager is actually looking at the pre-update and the post-update values of your incident. So did we fulfill the pre-value, the pre-update criteria? Yes, we did. Did we fulfill the post-update criteria? Yes, the incident was resolved. We didn't change that part, but we fulfilled that criteria. So that's why we're seeing these unwanted emails. So the right way to build your workflows or subscriptions is by using the tight criteria, and this is the do it this way. So if you specify change from, status does not equal resolved, and the change to criteria, status equals resolved. This is the correct way to do it. This will only send you an email when you actually resolve the incident. All right. So next, I would like to talk a little bit about extending Service Manager. So you can extend Service Manager in many ways. You can do this by writing your own management pack. You can do it by using Visual Studio authoring extensions and Visual Studio. Or you can do it by using the authoring tool. Now, we can have a whole session about how to use the authoring tool and how not to use it. But I wanted to just take a couple of notes today. So if you do a class extension, and this is a really common class extension because people tend to extend their classes with a property called send email or send notifications to turn off or turn on notifications on a particular incident or service request or whatever it might be. So if you do a class extension of the type bool, and a boolean property is a true or false prompt, a checkbox. So if you do this, don't forget to set the default value of this checkbox, of this boolean property. Because if you do so, this class extension will end up writing null to every object of this class in your database. So instead of being true or false, this will end up as being null. It's neither yes or no. It's neither true or false. So when doing these class extensions, remember to set the default value. If you forget about this, this is how it will look like in the console. Instead of having a checkbox or a blank checkbox, you will have a filled checkbox, because this is neither true or false. Somewhat confusing, right? And if you have created some workflows or views, wherever it might be, these kind of workflows or views might not function because this does not have a value. When importing this management pack containing this class extension, we will actually be adding this column to the database within Service Manager. And we will actually be writing the default value to each and every object of this class in the database. So when I import a management pack containing a class extension, which does not have a default value, it will update each instance, in this case, with the value null. It's null, it's blank. So doing a class extension and importing this management pack to your environment will affect your performance because you're actually modifying all those incidents. So if you have 10,000 incidents, you will do 10,000 updates to your database. So do not import class extensions during business hours. Do that outside of business hours. And since we're doing an update of each object of this class, we will actually be resetting or updating the last modified timestamp. And this is somewhat bad because people tend to use last modified timestamp on a day-to-day basis when they're working in the processes. So for instance, people might have a long list of incidents, and in order to see which one they were working with yesterday, they take a look at the last modified timestamp, right? or you might have a workflow or runbook using last modified as input parameters to this automation. So I have a customer of mine who is notifying their analysts when they haven't used or updated their cases, their work items, in a certain amount of days, and then they're using the last modified to do this. So doing these class extensions will interfere with that behavior. So let's take a short demonstration here. So I'm switching over to my demo machine. I'm running Service Manager locally here on my laptop. So first of all, let's take a look at the notifications. So I have two subscriptions here. One is using the untied criteria, and the other one is using the tied criteria. So this is the don't, the untied criteria one. And as you can see, this one is configured exactly as in the PowerPoint slide. We haven't specified a change from criteria. We only specified the change to criteria. So this is the don't. The other one is using the tied criteria. So I specified the change from value, status does not equal result, and the change to value is status equals result. So now, if I go ahead and resolve an incident here, I'll just take whatever here. So I'm going to enter immediacy affected user here, and I'm going to resolve this one. So change status to resolved. All right. There we go. So this should trigger both of these notifications. We should get 2 emails now. So let's launch our Outlook. So no emails yet. They should come here in a second. Now the workflows in Service Manager is time-based. They are running every 10 or 30 or per 1 minute basis. So if we're lucky, huh? Yeah, I did. Yeah. So if we're lucky, we might hit it right before the workflow is processing. So we could have a 1 second delay. Or if we're unlucky, we might hit it right after the workflow were executed, and then we have to wait for another minute. So it should turn up here any second, hopefully anyway. There we go. So we got both the emails. This one is from the workflow or the subscription using the tied criteria. And this one is from the one using the untied criteria. So both of these seems to be working as they should, right? Now, if we change the assign to user here, do we want this to trigger a new notification? No, we don't, because we didn't resolve this incident now. We simply changed the assign to user. Maybe I forgot to do this before resolving the case. But as you will see in a second, you will see that the untied criteria workflow or subscription is actually triggering this email. And there we go. So this is causing unwanted emails. So make sure to use subscriptions with a tied criteria. All right. The next part here is the class extension. So I have a management pack here, and this management pack contains a class extension for the incident class. So the extension is called send mail, and it's of type bool. I've not specified a default value, so when this reaches the database, it will write null to every incident. This part is only to actually add a checkbox to the form, so to show you what's happening. So let's just take this management pack and import it to Service Manager. I'm just going to show you this first. As you can see now, the last modified timestamp of all my incidents was at 3 o'clock. So let's do this class extension now. All right, let's import this one. And again, do not do this at business hours because this will interfere with your day-to-day business. It will affect your performance. So now Service Manager is extending the database with a new column in which we will store this value. Okay. So now if we take a look here, you can see that the last modified timestamp here is, as of now, the time is off because of my time zone settings. But as you can see, it's been updated on every single incident to the current timestamp. And if you take a look at an incident here, there we go. You can see that the checkbox for send automail is filled rather than checked or unchecked. There we go. So you can see that this checkbox is null. It does not have a value. Technically, if you take a look at the database, you can see that the database is extended with a new column. Whoops. So you can see that we have, where is it? Should be lost here. That's great. Oh, my mistake. So the database is extended with a new column, and this is the GUID for all the incidents, and you can see the value for this property. So when we did this class extension, as I said, we were modifying the last modified timestamp, and this is bad for your day-to-day business, but it does also affect your grooming of work items. So let's go back to our PowerPoint deck. So grooming is a background job in Service Manager. It's there to keep your Service Manager as fast as possible. This job will actually remove all the work items from your database. So if you have work items in your database that has been closed for the amount of days specified in your data retention settings, those items will be removed upon the job that's running at midnight. So now, if we have been working with Service Manager for a year, we have items that are getting groomed every day, and now we're doing a class extension of the service request class. We will be resetting that last modified timestamp. So basically, we're keeping all those incidents that should be groomed tomorrow for another year in your database. So you have increased the data in your database. And the more data you have in your database, the longer queries will take to execute, and that will cause a performance decrease. So in order to keep your Service Manager up to date, you'll have to take care of your grooming policies. We also have some settings on history grooming. So history is something that we're keeping track of on almost every single object in the database. So if we take a look at an incident, you will have this history tab where you can see what was changed by whom and what exactly the details of this change. You can see the same on service requests, on problems, on CIs like computers, software, and so on. We even have history on the user objects, even though we don't have the history tab on the form. And this is all kept in the database. So the grooming jobs here are used to make sure that you have as little data as possible in your database to maintain performance. Now let's take a closer look at how history works in Service Manager. So all the changes you do to Service Manager is kept as is stored as a transaction in the database in a table called Entity Transaction Log Table. And if you query this table, you can see exactly when the change was made, right here, by whom. And if you take the Entity Transaction Log ID, we can query another table called Entity Change Log Table. And this table contains all the different changes done in one transaction. So one transaction can contain many changes. And in this example, this is me creating a new incident in the database. So the first row here, row number 1, is the creation of the actual incident. The other ones are the relationships to different objects. So when I'm creating a new incident, I will be adding an affected user, an assigned to user. I will be creating relationships to created by. I might have activities. I might have some time worked, and so on. So one simple change can result in several rows in the entity change log table. If you would like to see exactly what was done in one particular change, you can take the entity change log ID, that's this value, and query another table. Now, depending on the class of that object, you'll have to query the correct table. But all these tables start with empty underscore something underscore log. So the log tables are named like this. So in the case of an incident, we'll have to query the empty system $work item $incident underscore log table. So let's take that change that value from the previous query and put it in here. And then you can see that this table contains every property of the incident class multiplied by 2. Because each property have a pre-value and a post-value. So first we have the value before the update and the value after the update. So since this was the creation of a new incident, the pre-value was null, and the post-value was set to low. And when you know this, you can realize that this is the way that workflow is working as well, because this is how it looks like in the database. So as you can see, one change will result in many rows in the database in several different tables. So now let's do some math here. So take the number of rows in your database, multiply that with the number of changes you do in your Service Manager environment each day. Then you multiply that by the number of analysts in your organization. And then you add all the changes done by connectors, by runbooks, and by workflows. And then you multiply that again with the number of days in your data retention settings for history. And you will end up with a pretty large number, right? So history is a large portion of the data inside the Service Manager database. So to enhance your performance of Service Manager, to keep it as fast as possible, tweak your data retention settings. Set them to as low as possible. If you can change it to 7 days, that's great. And for larger organizations, this might be necessary. So let's take work items as an example. If you do not want to change it to 7 days, if you can set it to 180 days instead, you have actually reduced the amount of data in your database with 50% of this portion of data. If you can set it to 90 days, they reduce it with 75%. So even if you don't want to set it to 1 week, try to reduce it to as low as possible. And remember that work items are still going to be present in your data warehouse. So even if it's deleted from the database in Service Manager, it will still be present in your data warehouse. When talking about history, I haven't seen a single customer going through the history tab of an object and going back a year. Have you tried that? It's not usable. You can't browse that kind of data. It's kind of useless, actually. So try to decrease the history to a week if you can. And the larger your organization is, the more changes you do, the greater the benefit of this will be. Have you seen this error before? everybody who's been using Service Manager for a while, or for a short while even, have seen this error message. It's a really common error. So this message reads, this item cannot be updated because it's been changed by another user or process. To update the item, please close the item and open it again. So to start with, I wouldn't call this an error, because this is a protective mechanism within Service Manager. It's there to protect you and your data. So let's take an example here. So if I open up an incident, and I start working with this one, then I have to go. So I leave my computer on, the incident form is still open. And while I'm away, my colleague opens the same incident, he contacts the end user, he resolves the incident. Everything is fixed, the incident is resolved. Now when I get back to my computer, if I try to save, I will be getting this error. And that's good, because otherwise I will be overwriting the values that my colleague entered in his console. I'm seeing old data, that's why I'm getting this error message. So it's there to protect us. I can see this error message in my environment as well, but I'm the only analyst in here. So this is caused by other things as well. So in Service Manager 2012, we had a couple of new features introduced. One of these were the first assign date workflow. And the first assign date workflow will set the first assign date timestamp on your work items when you assign it to a user. And that's what made this error more frequent in Service Manager 2012. So if you take a look at this one, you can see that about 30 seconds after I saved my incident, the first assign date workflow added the first assign date timestamp to the particular incident. So in this case, there were no user changing my incident. It was actually Service Manager who updated the incident itself. So to minimize the occurrence of this error, you can turn off this workflow. You can turn off the first assign date workflow. So if you're not using it in your service level objectives or in your statistics, you can simply disable this workflow to minimize this error message. So let's go back into my demo environment. And let's take a look at how you can do that. So let's do this first. Let's recreate that error. So I'm simply creating a new incident here. I'm gonna just select some values here. I'm gonna assign this to me, just like that. Apply. So now this is committed to the database. Service Manager and the workflow will discover this one, and after a while it will set the first assign date timestamp. So if we try to update this now, we might get an error message, and that depends on if the workflow has executed or not yet. So if we try to save this now, we get an error message. And this is the exact same error that we saw in the PowerPoint. So I can't save this one now. It's impossible. It won't let me save until I hit the refresh button, but when doing so, I will lose my data. I will lose that description. So now I can save this one. Okay? And as you can see here in the History tab, it was the first assign date workflow who updated our incident. Now, to turn off this particular workflow, you will have to do a management pack override on this particular workflow, because this is not visible in the console. So in order to do this, you'll have to create a management pack just like this, in which you can do a management pack override. So this is the only interesting part in this management pack. So you can turn off, you can change things in a sealed management pack. So for instance, in this MP, I'm overriding the workflow named work item, work item set first assigned to relationship add rule. I'm overriding the property called enabled, and I'm setting the new property to false. So by importing this management pack, I'm actually disabling this workflow. So let's do that. Let's import this management pack. And this management pack is available on my blog. And there's a link at the end of the slide deck where you can get it, so you don't have to remember all the code. So it's available there. So let's just import this management pack. And as soon as this is imported, this particular workflow is actually disabled. So as of now, the first assigned date will not be set. So we can try that pretty easy. Let's create another case here. Just like this. So that's the new incident. The other one, which we created a while ago, if I try to update this incident right now, will this work? Maybe, maybe not. There's some other things that will interfere with your incidents or your work items in general. And one of these things are your service level objectives. Service level objectives are added to your work items a couple of minutes after you save this. And so when I press apply, I should get an error message because Service Manager has now applied the SLOs to my particular incident. So let's refresh this one and take a look at here at the target end date. Service Manager has now updated the incident with the service level objective information. So that's another thing that might interfere with your incidents and service requests. And that's something that's harder to disable because if you do, you can't use your service level objectives. So you just have to accept that that's how it's designed. But now let's go back to the other incident. Let's try to save here. This should not cause an error message. There's at least 1.5 minutes between the save there. So the first assigned date is properly disabled right now. So that the workflow won't interfere with our day-to-day business anymore. So you can import this management pack to minimize the occurrence, but you can't take it away completely. Remember that this is a protective mechanism. It's there to protect you and your data. So let's go out from here. Some SQL. So the queries I had in my PowerPoint are pretty similar to these queries. So if you would like to browse your history using the database, you can execute these queries. So for instance, if you would like to see the entity change log for a particular incident, you can see that there's plenty of changes to this particular incident. You can see that these changes were done in different transactions. So this one is probably the creation of the incident. And then there's a couple of changes. If you would like to see who did this particular transaction, you can take the transaction log ID and query that table, just like this. And that's all the changes done in one transaction. And this is the transaction log table. And you can see that it was me doing these changes, and I did it at this point in time. I'll post these queries on my blog if you would like to have them, to take a look at your data. So they will be available there. Right? Can you please move? Yeah, okay, sure.
Is it applicable for 2012 or 2012 R2 as well?
It's applicable for both 2012 and 2012 R2.
And the second question, by disabling that particular workflow, what are we missing? What are we losing?
If you disable the first assigned date workflow, you will not be getting the first assigned date timestamp on your work items. And this first assigned date timestamp is most of the time used in your service level objectives. So if you're not measuring the time it takes for someone to actually get assigned to an incident, then you won't miss anything. Okay? right. Then we have some AD and config manager connector performance tweaking here. And the AD and config manager connector is based upon the LFX, the linking framework here. And these connectors have two parts of the synchronization. So the first part is called the data provider portion of the job. So this will reach out to AD or config manager and take the data from the source and bring it into the staging tables within Service Manager. The next part is called the data consumer part. And this will process the data in these staging tables, modify it to fit Service Manager, and then put in the correct tables within the database. Now, both these portions of the job are running in batches of different batch sizes. So instead of going to Active Directory and taking all the users, we're taking this in batches. Because if we will take all the users at once, we might kill our SQL server, right? So instead, it's done in batches. So the batch sizes for the data provider portion of the AD connector job is configured like this. So for users, we will take in 2,000 users at a time. And the same goes for computers, printers, and groups. And that's, most of the time, this is fair enough. That's good. But if you take a look at the data consumer portion of the job, you can see that the batch sizes are really small. They are way too small. And each batch has a certain amount of overhead. So by having these kind of small batch sizes, we're getting a lot of overhead, which will cause a performance decrease in these connectors. So if you have connectors running for a long time, you will need to tweak these batch sizes. So this is the default values. And if you would like to tweak this, you'll have to edit your database. You'll have to run queries against your database. And updates directly to the database is not supported. So try this out in your lab environment. I'm using this at customers, and it is working good, but it's still not supported. If you would like to see the current batch size of the AD connector portion and the data consumer part, this is the query you can run. So if you run this query, you will get back the batch sizes that you just saw. Now, to update these batches, you can run this query. So this will update the default batch size for the AD connector data consumer part to 1,000 objects. Now, the exact value which you should be using in your environment will be different because you will have another kind of hardware configuration, another kind of software and software configuration. You might have many objects in your Active Directory and so on. So you will have to try to find out the sweet spot for your environment. So if you would like to do this in your environment, I suggest you start with 1,000 objects. Then you run this for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Take note of the synchronization times. Then you test this again by increasing it by a couple of hundred or decreasing it with a couple of hundred objects. Run the connector again for a couple of weeks, and then compare the results to the previous run. And then in that way, you will find your sweet spot, the most appropriate fit for your organization and your environment. But again, changes to the database is not supported. Keep that in mind. Then we have something called implied permissions. Implied permissions is a part of the security model that allows users that are related to objects by a certain relationship to have certain permissions on those objects. And what the heck does that mean? Well, if you're the affected user of an incident, implied permissions will give you the permissions to view and edit that particular incident. Otherwise, you won't be able to update the incident or see it in the self-service portal. Implied permissions will give a reviewer in a review activity the permissions to vote on that particular review activity. Likewise, implied permissions will give the custodian of a computer the ability to view that computer CI. And there's a couple of rules here. There's actually 6 different rules, which does 6 different things. And implied permissions is a background job. It's running constantly in the background. And if you have a really large organization with many users and many objects in your database, implied permissions can kill your service manager performance. If you're a large organization above the supported configuration, and that's 50K users or more, this will be getting out of hands. Then you might have to disable your implied permissions. But remember, implied permissions is there for a reason. If you disable implied permissions, the user won't be able to see their own tickets on the self-service portal. They won't be able to update these. Reviewers won't be able to vote on your review activities. So if you disable the implied permissions, and you can do so by doing a mention pack override, just as we did with the first assign date. You can override this using a mention pack override. And I'll show you that mention pack in a while. But if you disable, for instance, the implied incident affected user portion of the implied permission part, you'll have to compensate for this by creating a new user role in Service Manager based upon the incident resolver profile and putting authenticated users as a member of that user profile. So you will be gaining performance, but you will be loosening on the security model of Service Manager. So by doing this, every single user in your organization is now an incident resolver. And this, if you want to compensate for config item custodian and primary computer custodian, the same thing goes for those jobs. Now, to compensate for implied reviewer, you would have to create another role based upon the advanced operator user profile. And this is the 3rd highest permissions in the database, in Service Manager. And then we'll have to put all the reviewers in that particular user role. The implied user preference here is a part of the implied permissions that grants users the permission to change their notification address and their locale. And this does sound good, but there's no interface to change this in Service Manager. So this particular implied permissions doesn't add anything. And it would be good if you just can turn off that part, because that's also the part that is used during your AD connector synchronization. But when working with implied permissions, there's no easy way to turn off just one of these jobs. Instead, you might have to turn off all 6 of them at once. So let's take a look at this. So let's go to my other server here. So here I'm logged in as Daryl, and Daryl is a regular user. And let's register a new incident here from the self-service portal. So I'm creating a new incident here. Oh, great. That's just awesome. Let's try again. Demo ghosts. third time. All right. Let's use my video then. So let's take a look at the video instead. So first of all, using the regular user account, I will be creating this new incident. Just a regular incident, just to show that that is working, which isn't right now in my demo environment. So just like that. We're committing this incident to the database. And as you can see here, it's now available under my request. And that's because of implied permissions. Implied permissions gave us the, wow. Implied permissions gave us the permissions to view and edit this object. Without implied permissions, we wouldn't have seen this object underneath my request. We wouldn't have seen this object here. Now, if we would like to turn off the implied permissions, we'll have to import this management pack override. And I can actually do it like this. Wow. Just like this. Here we go. So this management pack does contain a management pack override for the workflow called Microsoft.enterprisemanagement.systemcenter.implicit-user-role-administrator, and that's the implied permissions part. We're changing the property called enabled. We're setting the new property enabled to false. So by importing this, we're turning off implied permissions. Let's go back to that video. Whoa. So I've just imported that management pack. It's imported in the database right now. So when I did that, all the implied permissions are disabled as of now. So if I create a new incident, I won't be able to update or see that incident in the self-service portal. And this is as of now. If I have an environment where implied permissions is an issue, we might have a backlog in your workflows, so it may take a while for the actual workflow to stop, to catch up. Otherwise, it should be turned off instantly. So let's go back to the end user experience in the self-service portal. So we're back as a regular user here. We can still see our existing tickets because they were there before we disabled the implied permissions, right? So implied permissions already gave us the permissions on these objects. If we create a new incident here, just like this, we will not be able to see or update this incident. So going back to my request here, we should not see the incident with ID 1273.2. And we don't. It's not there because we do not have implied permissions in place. So to compensate for that, we would have to create this new incident resolve user role and add our authenticated users to that role. Then we should be able to see it here. Otherwise, we will have to enable implied permissions again. So if we go back to Service Manager and actually remove that management pack from the database, we have enabled implied permissions again. So just to show you that, let's just jump forward a bit here. So I'm going to remove that management pack. It's now being deleted from the database. And the implied permissions should be in place again. And then you have disabled a workflow. It's more like you're pausing it. Because if you pause or disable the workflow a month ago, and then you enable it today, it will continue from the moment when you post it. So it will actually work with all those incidents or objects that you created during this period of time. So you're aware of that. Yeah. Yeah, it will. So now going back to the portal, you can see that implied permissions are back in place. It's actually added the permissions for Daryl to see this particular incident, which in fact were created when it was disabled. But the workflow has catch up, and it gave us the permissions to see this object. OK, so let's remove that one. This management pack is available on the official Service Manager blog, so you can get it from there. There were blog posts about this about a week or two ago, so you can read some more information on this there. Let's take a look at the queries for modifying the batch sizes for your Service Manager, AD, and Config Manager connectors. So to see the current batch sizes for the data consumer part of your AD connectors, you can run this query. And as you can see, the batch sizes are quite small. They're too small. And if you would like to update the batch sizes, you would execute this query. And this will actually set the batch sizes to 1,000 objects. So if we run this query again, you can see that the new default value is now 1,000 objects. And you will see an increase in performance in your connectors, in the AD connector in this case. When doing this tweak for a customer of mine, we reduced the synchronization time for the Config Manager connector from 13 hours down to 3 hours. 3 hours. Reduce the time with 10 hours by tweaking the batch size settings. But again, changes directly to the database is unsupported unless instructed by Microsoft to do so. And I'm not Microsoft. But feel free to test it out in your lab environment to understand how it works. So try this value, then go back here, set this to 1250, and to see if the synchronization time is increased or decreased, and try to find your sweet spot, right? And if you would like to go back to the default values, you can always set it right back to where it all was from the beginning. Now it's back to default again. So I'll make sure to post these queries on my blog as well, so you can get them from there. And if we query the LFX data table, you can see all the batch sizes for all the different jobs used in Config Manager and AD connector. And as you can see, some of these are really small, like 100. We have something that the batch size here is 10 items. So this is what's causing bottlenecks in your connector performance. Great. All right. So to find more information about the first assign date workflow and to get that management pack, you can get it from my blog, sdsm.se. I'll also post the queries I ran here in my demonstrations there. And the whole slide deck here is downloadable from the TechEd site. You can get all the links from the slide deck, actually. If you would like to manually groom work items in Service Manager, you can take a look at that blog post. If you want to know more about modifying the batch size of your AD and Config Manager connector, that's the third one. And the fourth one is the implied permissions part here. All right? So this query here in this blog post is really useful if you're tweaking your grooming policy. Because the grooming policy, if you reduce it from a year down to 7 days, your grooming job will actually time out. Because they have too much data to groom. So you won't be able to run, so you're actually decreasing the performance by doing so. Then you might have to run the jobs manually using the queries within that blog post. Right. So if you're a Service Manager geek like me, there's a couple of other sessions this week. There's a session tomorrow on how to use Service Manager in combination with the Windows Azure Pack. There's a session on Wednesday. There's another session on Thursday. There's also a couple of hands-on labs and one instructor-led lab. So take a look at those. For more information about Windows Server, System Center, Azure Pack, and so on, take a look at those links. There's information about the sessions here. You can find information on TechNet and MSDN and so on and so forth. I'm actually finished ahead of time, so if you have any questions, I'll gladly take them now. So is there any questions?
I've got one.
Do we have a microphone over there?
Hello.
Well, I'll talk. There you go. So you mentioned that we can control the history and reduce the amount of history that we see. Is that history still going to be stored in the data warehouse at the time?
No, the history is not copied to data warehouse. No,
Okay. So if we reduce it down to 7
if
days.
the history is grouped, it's gone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have another question? All right. Then I'll beg you to enter the evaluation to win an Xbox or to win a gift card. It's valuable to me to hear what you think about this presentation. So please complete the evaluation. And with that, I would like to say thank you from me. In this project, make sure that you keep them informed so they know what is happening and why you're doing this journey of implementing Service Manager. So this is really the core part of Service Manager, the processes and the people. The technology is simple. It might maybe also be the most fun part, but this is the most important part. Now, when talking about the processes, let's start to take a look at the categories and area lists used in the console of Service Manager. Now, category and areas might seem like an easy topic, but trust me, I get loads of discussions on this topic when I go to customers. Now, category or area is used in all the processes. You have them in instance management, service request, problem, and so on. And they're called different things, but they're essentially used in the same way. These look kind of different out of the box. You can see that the service request area is really different from the instant classification categories. And this is somewhat confusing to your analysts. So I would like to share my thoughts on this. But first, let's take a look at some statistics. So this is some statistics from a customer of mine, which I helped about a year ago. They used another services application. And in this tool, they were working with incident management. This tool also has some kind of categorization. And they wanted to take the same list and move it into Service Manager. And I had to take this discussion with them. So to start with, this customer had 284 categories in this previous tool. So this list was huge. And it was also a flat list, so it was really a huge list. Out of these 284 categories, 88 of these were used less than 10 times a year. And that's not even once per month. The top 9 items here, and that's the one that you can see on your right-hand side, were represented in 75% of all their incidents. So even though they had this huge list, they only used like 9 items, which is rather confusing. If we take a look at the actual top 9 categories, you can see that the top category was login issues. There's nothing strange with that. That's probably the most common one. The second largest one was Outlook. And in Service Manager, Outlook should have been an affected CI. It shouldn't be a category. But the third one is the category called Other. And that's kind of strange, isn't it? So they had this huge list, 284 items, and the 11% of all incidents will still use the category called Other. So why is that? Well, I think it might be so that they had too many choices. The lists were too huge. They couldn't find the most appropriate fit, so they took the easy path and selected Other instead. Or they found several fits and couldn't decide on which one was the most appropriate one, so they select Other. So this is the don't. Don't do it this way. You don't take your previous list and import it into Service Manager. You have to keep your list down. So this is my take on the list. So when talking about category or area in Service Manager, try to keep these lists short. I would say about 10 items. And I actually managed to get this customer from 284 items to 13, so it's possible. Child items is OK, but don't overdo it. Because if you have 10 main categories and then 10 child items, then you will end up with 100 categories anyway, so keep it short. To get the whole picture of what the instance is all about, or the service request is all about, you have to combine the category or area together with the affected CI or the affected services. That's how you get the whole picture. So you do a rough categorization using the incident classification, and then you do the more specific categorization using the affected CI. Okay? And avoid using Other as a list item. By removing Other from your list, you're forcing your analyst to make an active decision on the best fit. So even though you might only have 10 categories, they have to do a selection. They can't take the easy path in selecting Other. Okay. All right. Seems like the clock is 4:45. It's time to get started. Welcome to this Service Manager session. I'm glad to see so many of you here. I hope you enjoyed your first day of TechEd. I sure did. My name is Anders Asp. I work as a principal consultant at a company called Lumagate. Lumagate is based in Sweden, and that's why I have such a silly accent. I'm also an MVP in the System Center Cloud and Data Center Management area. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I co-authored the Service Manager Cookbook. I'm a trainer. I train Service Manager courses in Sweden and Norway. I got my own blog at scsm.se. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. I've been working with Service Manager for 5 years now, 2 years at a municipal and 3 years as a consultant, and I've seen many different kind of scenarios and many different customers. And today we will be looking at some of my lessons learned during these 5 years. So the agenda now is my do's and don'ts of implementing Service Manager. Now, I know the title here is Advanced Lessons Learned, but I will be talking about different scenarios of different kind of complexity, from basic to advanced. So I'm hoping that you have the right expectations going into this session. All right? So I would like to start with the core of Service Manager, and that would be the processes. And Nathan just had a whole session about the processes here, and I hope you saw that session. But Service Manager is a tool to support your processes. Service Manager doesn't make a bad process any better. people tend to forget about the processes when working with Service Manager. But Service Manager is built around this. And that's where we have to start when doing an implementation of Service Manager. Do an envision, an assessment. Look at the processes in use. How are these working? Who's the owner of these processes? What's the KPIs? Who's the incident manager? Who's the change manager? And so on. And you need to start there. This is a key success factor to a successful Service Manager project. Start with your processes. Another key part for a successful Service Manager project is the people. When doing a project like this, you have to involve the right people. The Service Manager is a tool designed for your IT department. It's a services application. So you need to involve the right people within IT from each support group, from users from each process. But you have to remember the end users, because Service Manager will serve as a front end for IT. People will contact IT through the self-service portal in Service Manager. So you have to involve these people as well, and make sure that all of these people can express their opinion on what they think is important